Hey, it's Becky with A Better Way to Homeschool. We are going to talk about math. Don't panic. Before we get started, I want you to know that I have a handout that is for every session that I've done in this conference. And there's some resources in there that hopefully you will find helpful in teaching math specifically. Out of all 5 of my sons, only one of them is a math brain. And before we go into math vocabulary, I want you to know that in my opinion, all kids need to know their foundational math concepts. They need to know how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, measure, understand and use fractions and decimals and measurements and those types, the things that they're going to touch in their daily life. But just because a child can move forward in math doesn't mean they should. Make sure by the time you're starting to tiptoe towards late middle school or high school that you are paying attention to your child. Our oldest son was brilliant at math, meaning he could complete the assignments and get a good grade all the way through high school. And when we moved his junior year, he found that even though he had already completed 4 years of high school math, he still needed another requirement because of where we were living. And he was boxed into taking calculus. And calculus is a great class if you like math. Turns out, not only was my son brilliant at math and able to do it, but he's not a mathematician. He's a historian. That's his gift in life, is history and putting social puzzle pieces together. And so we had boxed him into taking this really hard math class. So before we talk vocabulary, understand that the foundation in math is the most important thing for most kids, and that yes, some kids will move on and go to higher math, calculus, and all those things that God invented college professors for. Okay, math vocabulary. Out of 25 years of homeschooling, this is the one subject that I personally dug my heels in the most at the beginning, and that I've witnessed other homeschool families dig in, especially at the beginning. When you're in that kindergarten through 5th grade math zone, most of us understand that math. We know how to add, we know how to subtract, we know how to multiply, divide, and to use fractions, especially if we cook or bake, to figure out basic percentages and those types of things. We understand the math. And because we understand it, we use words that make sense to us. So if I am going to do a math problem and everything I write down today will be super simple. If I write down this math problem, most people will say 3 plus 2. And that is the correct way to say it. You could say 3 and 2. You could say add 3 plus 2. The language that you use is what you're comfortable with. You'll see it more when you use multiplication, when you say times. 3 times 2. This is in math. And we don't bump into roadblocks with our ability to communicate what our kids need to do with what they're seeing on paper, because it's our comfort zone, because it's foundational. And so when our math book that we're using to teach our child labels this as an answer and this as an answer, we naturally say to our kids, what is the answer of 3 plus 2? We resist or dig our heels in. We don't say, what is the sum of 3 and 2? We dig our heels in and we say, what is the answer of 3 times 2? We don't say, what is the product of 3 times 2? And that serves our kids just fine when they are in kindergarten through 5th grade, because they're in our zone. They're in that place where they are touching and using math and math concepts and math words that make sense. They're things that we are rock solid in. And so we resist, we dig our heels in, we resist the fancy words. We don't use sum, product, Do you know the others? What if I subtract? What is the answer in subtraction called? It is called the difference. Just looking at my camera here. And what if I divide? What is the answer? 6 divided by 2. We would ask our kids, what's the answer? When we should be saying, what is the quotient? Now don't panic, but listen. As your kids pass the area of math that you and I use every day, they're going to enter into math that we have to pre-study in order to teach. And the challenge is, if we haven't taught them the words that are in the book, or if we don't take time to remember or learn the words while they're in the younger grades, then we're going to hit the wall of math vocabulary square in the face sometime between 6th and 12th grade. This is different for everybody because it will vary based on your mathematic ability and your own math vocabulary. And what we want to avoid is saying things like, oh, this is not fun. Or I can't do this. Or worse. What's worse? We never want to say these types of things to our kids about this. Here's the newsflash that we need to model to our kids, and that is that every single thing around us has its own set of vocabulary. So while our kids are little, looking for my eraser, while our kids are little, we have to embrace that season of life that God gave them where they are hardwired to memorize vocabulary. They learn all the vocabulary for food and laundry and cleaning and family and community and coloring and colors and shapes. There's no reason why they can't also learn the vocabulary of the things that are coming ahead in the bigger math, in the harder math, in the more complicated math. And the reason that I think that homeschoolers dig their heels in is because math, in particular, is the most academic and school-looking things that we do with our kids. Most of us don't think to just take sidewalk chalk outside and to do all the math outside and to use a squirt bottle as an eraser. Oh, that's fun. Most of us don't use a whiteboard or take our fancy dry erase markers and do math on the sliding glass window at the back of the house in the family room. Most of us use a math textbook, and we are requiring our child to do lesson 11 and then lesson 12 and then lesson 13. And when they are in this grade zone, it's still pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward. But once we get up in here, you and I get lost. We get lost in the descriptions, because we don't know the words. And so we need to capitalize and pause and focus on what are the words that our kids are needing to know, because when they hit these ages, they need the vocabulary. Why? If you don't take the time to teach your kids the vocabulary words before the math gets harder, then very quickly they turn into, they slow down so bad because they don't understand the words. Oh, if you would just say 6 divided by 2, they'd be fine. But that's not what the books are going to be saying. The books are going to be saying 6, the quotient of 6 and 2 less than the sum of the difference between the product. It gets complicated. The words get complicated. And that's not a bad thing because everything has its own set of vocabulary, math included. So when your kids are little, don't dig your heels in. Learn the vocabulary. But you can do it in bites and pieces. You don't have to learn it all. So here's a strategy for you. When your kids are learning a concept, I'm going to get rid of the snail because we don't want snail kids, although you don't need to rush your kids. We don't want to train them to be snails either. So in math, one of the subjects that the kids are going to be learning is fractions. So as you're doing the fractions and you're being the really cool homeschool mom or dad and you're doing the, you're baking and you're doubling the recipe so you have to do twice 3/4 of a cup of something, and you're doing the little manipulatives where you're building pizza pies and all this stuff. So you're doing the cool homeschool stuff. But you got to learn the fraction words too. And so I'm not going to list them all, but when you are working with fractions, you don't just say the top number is 1 and the bottom number is 2. You got to learn the words. Well, what's the label for the top number? So one whole day or week can be practicing the words numerator and denominator. Not the top number, the numerator. Not the bottom number, the denominator. And practice quoting this. You want to say this to your kids all the time. Everything has its own set of vocabulary. Can you see that? Everything has its own set of vocabulary. So as you are approaching these things in math, whatever they are, learn the labels. And you say that, we're going to be talking about fractions, so we better make sure that we know the right words, the right labels, because mathematicians around the world are not going to say the top number or the bottom number. They're going to say numerator or denominator. So we need to know the words so that we can focus. Understanding that everything has its own set of vocabulary sets your kids up for success, not only in math, but in science, because the same type of people that are mathematicians are the same type of people that could be scientists as well. And they're communicating around the planet, and they have their master set of vocabulary the same way that if I was going to teach you how to make homemade pizza dough, and if I say knead the dough, you may hear this word, and I say knead the dough, and you're thinking, well, yeah, I need the dough because that's how I get pizza. But that's not what I'm saying. As a baker, I'm talking about that pliable molding of the dough. Knead the dough. So everything has its own set of vocabulary. To set yourself up for success in teaching math vocabulary, start paying attention to specialized words around you. When you're at the mechanics and they tell you that the car requires a new water pump, and they say that the OEM part will be $142 plus labor, your child standing next to you, you say the words, I don't have the correct vocabulary to understand what you're saying. What is an OEM part? When you are signing your kids up for a rowing team, these are real life things that I've done. You're signing your kids up for a rowing team, and the coach says that there are 2 regattas scheduled for this year. And I raise my hand and I say, I know everything has its own set of vocabulary, and I just don't know rowing vocabulary yet. What is a regatta? And then the coach explains that that's a race. The reason that I constantly say this, I don't have the right set of vocabulary yet. What is? I'm modeling to my children. You get to model to your children that everything has its own set of vocabulary, and understanding what the words are for that thing unlocks their ability to do whatever it is next. If you're sewing, if you're cooking, if you're gardening, if you're building, everything has its own set of vocabulary. So don't be afraid to learn words like numerator or denominator. Don't think that you are playing school when you require your child to reduce a fraction or to create equivalent things or to find the difference between two numbers. You're not slowing them down and you're not academicizing them. Was that a word? You're not playing school. You're equipping them to understand that everything has its own set of vocabulary. And don't dig your heels in, because when I got my homeschooling head start, after my husband tricked me into homeschooling, our church had started a school and I got put in, it was a co-op school. Parents were the teachers inside the school, and I spent 3 years teaching 5th grade before we officially unplugged and went homeschool kind of rogue on our own. And in that 5th grade, that triple trifecta or whatever it was of 3 years of 5th grade in a row, I saw the power of understanding the words and not understanding the words. The kids that knew the vocabulary were able to accept and just do and master the math facts as they came rolling down the hill. And the kids that had only been taught things like, what is the answer, were slowed down. And when kids get older than this and they get slowed down because they don't understand the words, it pulls them down, it weighs them down. So embrace the vocabulary. If your kids are young, preschool, kindergarten, 1st grade, oh my gosh, you can fill their brains with this stuff and they won't even blink. It's fantastic. So embrace it. Embrace the vocabulary. Now, ways that you can do this. You use your text, the math book. Most people use a math curriculum of some sort to teach mathematics. And most math books are broken into about 16 chapters. Each chapter is going to have a set of vocabulary necessary for your child to move on. And the good news is that vocabulary repeats over and over and over and over again. There is not an endless amount of vocabulary that has to do with addition or subtraction or fractions or percentages or measures. So take the time to do whatever works. Everybody thinks differently. Some people doodle, and the doodles help make vocabulary make sense. Some people do flashcards. Some people do games. But I'm going to tell you that your comfort level with the vocabulary words can positively or negatively impact your child as they're learning. So guard yourself, guard your tongue if you've had negative math experiences. You don't want to tell your child things like, I hate math because I can't understand it. No, mama. Model learning the words. You get to say things like, I never learned this set of vocabulary. I am so excited that I get to learn these words with you. And then get creative with your dry erase marker on the windows, on the mirrors, with sidewalk chalk, with labels, with Post-its, all those things. So, where can you find your math words? Right inside the text. Right inside each math textbook. In the chapters, it'll have vocabulary, usually at the beginning of the chapter. If you flip to the back of the book, that back section with definitions is called the glossary. You can look for words in the glossary. You can find math games that are math vocabulary specific. I had one listed. This one looked really fun. This Quizmo math vocabulary was a selection of games that you can do to master math vocabulary. It was a small variety of games. That looks really fun. And then the other thing that you can do is you can look online by Googling addition vocabulary for, and then fill in the age group, fill in the typical grade. Don't push your child through a grade square shaped hole if they're a square, don't smush them through. But you can use those grade marks or those grade levels as benchmarks for your kids. So if they are in this section, if you put math vocabulary for a third grader, the third grader, fourth grader, and fifth grader are typically going to be using the same kind of words. So those are the ways that you can do that. And then you can practice writing, learning, speaking, and using vocabulary as you are doing the math. So you can look at a math lesson and you can read it first with a highlighter, where you go on a vocabulary word hunt and you highlight the words that you need to know. Then you can do the math and practice saying the words as you're doing it. If you say 3 plus 2 is what, you can say, gosh, what is the answer called again in addition? Oh, in addition, the answer is the sum. And with that, you can have success teaching your kids math. Anyway, have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.